Welcome back to the M&M podcast. On today's episode, we will talk about the best Canadian musicians and bands. Alex, this is obviously a topic near and dear to your heart. You
Very
are
near
a
and dear.
Canadian and a former member of a Canadian band, so I'm
Mhm.
sure this will be a good topic for you today.
Yeah, I gotta help out all my fellow Canadian artists, of course.
Mhm. Yeah, we don't get as much publicity up here in the Great White North. We need to help out our artists like Drake and The Weeknd, make sure they're getting their due. They've
Make sure
got
they get
like
the recognition. Oh yeah,
Yeah, they've got like 100 million Spotify listeners a month, whatever it is, and a number of Grammys, but they need us to definitely go over
pump
it.
those
But
numbers. Let's pump those
yeah,
numbers up for them.
yeah, rookie numbers. But in all seriousness, we do want to kind of touch on obviously some of the great musicians that have come from this country. Canada is kind of underrated in terms of the musicians that it's produced. I think there are some people on this list that may come as a surprise to people outside of Canada, that they were Canadian. Some of them, it's maybe a bit of a gray area if it's a Canadian band or not, but we'll
Hmm.
claim them for sure.
Of course.
Um, but obviously, I guess we could just kind of start about, music in Canada and the influence. I mean, Canada is kind of an interesting place in general, obviously, because we obviously get a huge amount of influence from the US, but
Hmm.
also England, because obviously, there were a lot of immigrants from the UK and that, and so the music scene is kind of a blend of both. You find country western music, punk music, kind of
Hmm.
anything that's out there.
Yeah, like we get most of our media from the States. That's
For
the big
sure.
thing. And so there was I'm blanking on this now, but the law put in place for the certain amount of Canadian content.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
There's a law in Canada where a certain percentage of anything played on the radio, maybe even television, but definitely the
Hmm.
radio for music.
It's
Um, I
25%, I
think
think.
I think it's even
Last
more.
time
I
I
think it's
checked.
like
Oh,
50.
oh wow,
I think
yeah.
it's like 50.
Well,
So if you're ever listening to a Canadian radio station, especially a pop one, you will hear a lot of like Shawn Mendes,
yeah,
a
Justin
lot of The
Bieber and
Weeknd, a lot of
yeah,
Bieber, because there's a law, and I understand. You can debate any law really,
yeah,
but
of course.
I think the biggest thing is kind of preserving Canadian culture and
Hmm.
just helping Canadian artists when obviously there's a lot of artists in the U.S. who are quite popular. So, I think it makes sense from an artist's point of
Hmm.
view to get a little help. But
Gotta fight
I
for little
guess we
guys in
could,
Canada.
yeah, but I guess we could kind of start with kind of maybe the folk soft rock scene,
Hmm.
because a couple of the most iconic artists, who again people may not know are Canadian if they're outside of Canada, came from Canada. And I'll start with one artist who's considered one of the best songwriters of all time, Joni Mitchell.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh yeah.
she's from Alberta, even though she's obviously synonymous with the kind of Southern California, hippie rock scene back in the 60s and early 70s. But she's from Alberta. She moved to Toronto for university. And obviously, she's an iconic artist. Her Blue album is considered one of the best of all time. And she's also known for being kind of an album artist as opposed to a singles type artist.
Mhm.
And she even described her own work, saying that this is her, obviously, saying, "My music is not designed to grab instantly. It's designed to wear for a lifetime, to hold up like a fine cloth,"
Oh
which
wow.
is a pretty great line,
It's profound.
yeah, pretty profound, and would sound incredibly absurd if it weren't such an incredible artist
Mhm.
who said the line, because that's completely true. Like, honestly, I don't know that many Joni Mitchell songs. I just know when I hear her songs, I really enjoy them. And she's very creative. If you've seen her perform, like with the guitar and kind of manipulating the guitar in that,
Mhm.
obviously she was a big part of Woodstock,
Yep.
um, legendary concert, that goes without saying.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's someone who I'm not sure how many Americans would know that she was Canadian, because she spent so much time in the US. Like, she moved there, I think, when she was like a teenager, early 20s or something like that, got her music career going in Los
Mhm.
Angeles. I know David Crosby was, I think, dating her and kind of like helping her get around in the music industry.
Oh,
And
I didn't know
I'm
that.
not I'm not sure how
Mhm.
how well they get along, or
Yeah.
obviously did. Unfortunately, David Crosby passed away, but
Mm.
yeah, she was hugely influential artist and definitely considered one of the best songwriters of all time. If you look at any kind of media outlet when they have a ranking, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
she's right up there. And then another kind of folk soft rock um, musician who's also quite iconic and kind of doing his best work around that time as well would be Neil Young.
Yeah, definitely.
I would say he's one of, like Joni Mitchell, just one of the great Canadian artists of all time, and just one of the best folk guitarists and musicians of all time. I mean, you've played in a band. I mean, what do you think of Neil Young, and did he influence you at all with his music?
Influenced me in terms of my acoustic guitar playing a lot.
Yeah.
Definitely like the folksy sound. Like I remember my first song I've ever played by him was Heart of Gold, and it
Hmm.
was uh my I remember my brother, so my twin brother, he was the bass player in Capital Behavior. So I got to
Yeah.
name drop us there again. And what happened
Another
is like
great Canadian band.
Live Your Canadian Band. We'll get into them later.
Yeah.
But what happened was a campfire guitar player. That's how I started out. And my brother got harmonicas, like a whole kit of them. So he would play harmonica, and we both learned the intro to Heart of Gold. So he played
Nice.
harmonica, and then I played the guitar, and then we just that's how I got introduced to him. And I was like, wow, this is great. This is great, nice like folk music, right? Which I started off
Hmm.
learning classic rock, and then I that's how I was introduced more to the softer stuff with Neil Young, to
Yeah.
be honest. But
For sure. And he was definitely known as one of the great acoustic players of all time.
mm,
He was a song player, like a creative player, I would say, as opposed to maybe like some of the more technical players, right, who could play
mm,
any song you can imagine. I would say his kind of specialty, or what made him different, was just how he was able to create sounds, as opposed to being like the best technical player of all
mm.
time.
It's like
Um,
soulful, right? It's like
yeah,
you
for
see it in the
sure.
songwriting in his lyrics. That's the big thing.
And I think that's kind of the just in music in general that I find that more difficult is the creativity aspect as
Mm,
opposed to just playing. Obviously, it's incredibly impressive if you're a brilliant technical player,
mm,
and you can play any song imaginable. But I think it's more difficult and more rare to actually be able to come up with a song, come up with a riff, right, that no one's ever done before, or something unique, right? And that's what Neil Young was able to do for sure. He has several big albums, and he was part of a really good band in the early '70s, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and
mm-hmm.
Young. He wasn't in it the whole time, but what a group they were! The star power in that group.
Yeah.
Not sure how not sure how happy of a group it was playing all together, but
Super group for
they
sure though.
made they made some great they made some great music, and definitely a super group. And then another kind of another group that fits into that genre. Now, this one's a little bit contested in terms of Canadian or American,
Yep.
but that would be the band.
The
The band.
band. Yeah.
What? First of all, let's start with the name. What is that? Like,
I see what's
do you
great
like
about
it, or do you like it?
I
Like the
I
band name?
I do because it's tongue in cheek. It's like I think when they started, I don't know the history behind this, but I guess when they started, they're like, okay, what are you guys called? Like, and they're playing, and they're like, oh, we're the band. It's just
Hmm.
simple as like they couldn't come up with a name or something, and they said, oh, we're the band for tonight or something like that. That's how I think
Yeah,
it might
I
have started
actually
out. Like, what do
there's
you think
a
about you?
there's a documentary about the band, specifically Robbie Robertson, who was like the songwriter and kind of the driver of the band, like the founder.
Mhm,
Um, and he was from Toronto. Um, and so when the band kind of formed, they ended up staying in Woodstock
mhm.
because it was kind of just like Woodstock, New York.
Oh,
Um, because it was kind of just a quiet town, they wouldn't get bothered, and they could just kind of focus on their music, relax. Just a quiet little place. And around town, because the locals are there, there's not that many people. It's a bit different when there's kind of a different group, different people hanging around town. So
mhm,
people would refer to them as the band, just because they knew they were a band and they played music, obviously, and they were staying there for the time being, so everyone referred to them as the band. And they didn't have a name yet, so they just went with that, which
and it stuck
is
though.
obviously kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I feel like they're a little bit underrated by kind of just like pop culture,
Mhm,
in terms of the like how critically acclaimed they were and how musicians feel about them. Like I know Bob Dylan had went on tour with them and
mhm,
had them kind of play with him and open for him, and he thought they were like incredible. And obviously Bob Dylan's considered one of the best artists of all
mhm.
time. Also Bruce Springsteen was kind of coming up around the same time, maybe a little later, but he also thought very highly of them and found them very influential. in his work, and they were around. You know, they kind of formed in the late '60s and toured throughout the '70s. But definitely a great band. I think the thing with them is they don't have a ton of like singles. A bit
Yeah.
like Joni Mitchell, where she's known as kind of an album artist.
Mhm.
They created a bunch of really good music, um, but there's not many singles other than The Wait. The Wait's a great song. A lot of
That's the
people
one.
would recognize that one.
That's what I want to bring up. I'm saying if you guys don't know the band, that is the song, The Wait,
Yeah,
because like
yeah.
that's the one. And again, I'm gonna bring this up again. Bennett and I. So you've
Mhm.
obviously a guest I had before Bennett. In the
Mhm.
band, we played The Wait as a cover, and it was one of the most fun songs that I we played. It was a simple guitar work, not too hard, but it was the vocals, and that's what
Mhm.
I think makes a really good band. We're talking about the Stones in this, sorry, the Beatles and the Stones. Was the Stones liked how the Beatles had multiple singers in the band, and so
Mhm.
in The Wait we had a three-part harmony, and you know the like going up to the chorus, you
And
put the low
put the
right
load
on
right on
me,
me. Yeah,
exactly. And so that
yeah.
was my favorite because it was Bennett, me, and our lead singer Christian, and so we did
Mhm.
the three-part harmony, and and that's the thing that makes I think the song pretty iconic. Plus a
Yeah.
little bit of like oddball lyrics, which it
For
stands out.
sure. Like a little
Yeah.
quirky kind of storytelling. Definitely. But a great song. Definitely check that out if you haven't heard of the band or you just wanted one song to get introduced. But yeah, like I think that's part of maybe why they're not as popular to a lot of
Mhm.
people, especially outside of like the States and North America, just because they don't really have many singles that kind of are easy on the ear. Anyone can kind of enjoy it, you know, as
Mhm.
opposed to really having to understand music to kind of appreciate it. But certainly a great band, and definitely check them out if you haven't already. But
Mhm.
so I mentioned, you know, this is a Canadian artist and Canadian band episode. This
Yeah.
one, there's a little bit of not controversy, but
A
it's
little bit
not
of
as
debate, a
cut
little
and
bit of
dry
debate.
that they're Canadian because if you look them up, they're considered a Canadian American band, which I find preposterous. Yes, there is a
Why,
member of the
Mitch?
band who is American, but if you had a band that was four Americans and one Canadian, it would just be like an American band. Don't you think? Don't you think it would just be considered an American band?
They group them in. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, American, yeah,
Whereas I
100%."
think probably the majority of people would, if you ask them, like, where's the band from? Like, what country? They'd be like, well, US or England. So I believe US, or they would know they're from the US.
Yeah.
Even though four of the five members are Canadian, including the founder and main
Mhm.
songwriter, Robbie Robertson. The only American was Levon Helm, who is the singer, in all fairness, and the drummer. So that's interesting. That's always interesting. The drummer singers. I think you have to be just an absolute musical savant
Mm.
to be able to play the drums and sing at the same time. Considering the rhythm you need to keep when you're drumming versus when you're
Mhm.
singing, and just the dexterity too to be moving your body and having
Oh,
to sing at the same time. Right?
like I can only think
There's
of a
only a
few.
couple.
Like
There's
Phil Collins is the one that comes to mind for me.
Phil Collins is definitely like the one most people think of from Genesis.
Yep.
Lee Von Helm, one of the best.
Mm.
And then the only other one I know of or that I can think of is Don Henley.
That's yeah.
Those are the only three from the Eagles, of course. So yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
oh, Ben Blundell.
definitely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We had him on. We laugh, but he is a terrific musician.
Oh,
But
he's the best musician I know, hands down.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, but yeah, it's. I think you really have to understand music. I feel like there's a lot of things that go into that because it just seems for someone who can't play an instrument, I can't imagine. Even playing the guitar for me would seem difficult. But I guess if you know the guitar well enough, it's almost just second nature playing a song, right? And then
Mhm.
singing is kind of what you're maybe focusing on in a way. I don't know. You
Yeah,
tell me. You're the singer and guitar player.
interesting thing is like when I played, it was stuff with a four-piece band, so I was the only guitar player. Uh, and when you're singing and playing, there's only a few songs where I sang lead. So I was mostly the backup singer, but singing lead and playing like lead guitar, it's nearly it's very difficult, nearly impossible. I know that for me anyways. I know that when I like a lot of lead singers in bands, they'll be rhythm guitarist. So when they
Mm-hmm.
play, they're playing the chord progression, and it's easier because that follows the lyrics mostly. If you're following like the keys and stuff, the key changes, well, not key changes, but like you're following the melody, whereas a lead will do their own thing. They'll have
Mhm.
another like a voicing on top of that. And so with that, with the lyric, with like singing, very difficult. And so
Yeah.
a lot of respect for like lead guitar players and sing, and as well as a lead singer. Very difficult. You don't see it often. But with drums, I can't play drums, period. Like I tried occasionally to play, like if I needed to fill in for a
Mhm.
song, where Bennett was on piano or something like that. Very difficult. So singing and playing drums, it's I can't even imagine it.
Yeah,
So
for sure. And yeah, I mean, that was definitely that for sure makes sense. I guess moving on to maybe a different genre, we can kind of go through a couple different ones.
mhm,
Looking at kind of rap and R&B. Now there are several artists who fit this description, mainly from Toronto, of course, the biggest city in Canada. We wanted to just touch on two, kind of the
sorry.
big two, if you will,
Mhm,
two of the biggest artists of our lifetime of the 21st century. And that would obviously be Drake and The Weeknd. I guess we can start with Drake.
mhm.
He's become, I was gonna say a bit of a meme, but that
I
would be that wouldn't be accurate. He's become a meme.
Yeah,
Um,
it's because he's so big. That'd be a disservice to
yeah,
saying he's just a meme now. Yeah.
yeah, and that's the thing is like he's massive, and that's just what happened. Like the like Instagram, TikTok, and all that, just like meme culture in general. Once you kind of start getting picked on, it's a snowball down a mountain,
Oh,
right?
oh yeah.
Where
Internet's
people just keep
undefeated. It
going.
will always happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like not that it's serious, it's funny. Like a lot of them are funny, obviously.
Yeah.
But Drake does have a pretty impressive catalog. When I like I probably listen to a lot more hip hop than you,
Mhm.
but when I think of some of the best rappers of my generation, the best hip hop artists, um, like kind of in my wheelhouse of when I was growing up and what me and my friends would listen to, I would say there's four who kind of started and were in their prime when I was kind of in my teenage years, what I was listening to.
Mhm.
And that would be Kendrick, J. Cole, Future, and Drake. Those would be the
Mm.
four for me. Because you see a lot of hip hop, the sound is kind of the same, obviously, with
Mhm.
some of the just the regular chart songs. But I would say those four were able to create kind of their own sound and also produce multiple albums, like full albums that are like good to listen to, as opposed to just kind of singles.
Mhm.
And if you look at Drake, like he had a really impressive run
Mhm.
of albums, like in the like mid 2010s.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say my favorite Drake album is probably um, it could be Take Care. I don't know. There's a couple for
Mhm.
sure. But I would say like he had an album. I'll pull it up just so I get the order right.
Yeah.
But it was like Take Care. If you're reading this, it's too late. Nothing was the
Yeah.
same. But here, I'll read it in
I
order
remember
because it
that
was
coming out
quite.
when we were in high school. The if
Yeah.
you're reading this is too late. And
Hmm.
I like again like I was growing to like Drake's music. Like I've never like out of the gates been like a huge Drake fan. Like Mitch was saying, I
Hmm.
don't listen to too much hip hop. I've been listening to more and more now.
Hmm.
I've been more R&B. I've been more old
Yeah.
school R&B. I really love. Um,
Oh, same.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I was gonna say like I like Marvin
Otis
Gaye and
Redding.
the Commodores. Those are like one of my two favorite like
Yeah.
70s like R&B. So
Otis
with
Redding.
Otis Redding, yeah, I can't forget him. So in terms of now, like I lean toward more towards the weekend because I found he has a more
Hmm.
um the R&B and he's very influenced by the 80s. You see it with like all the synths and stuff in his new
Definitely his
songs and
newer
album.
albums for sure.
Exactly, but with Drake, there's some like I listen to it with friends, and like I was saying, with Mitch, I like hanging out with a bunch of like when I hang out with a bunch of different groups of people, like I started learning
Hmm.
different music, and so my roommates they listen to Drake a lot, so I was exposed to a lot of his stuff, and Nice for What, Nonstop, and Passion Fruit are probably the ones I hear the most, and I those are
Yeah.
turn to be some of my favorite. Like I love those are great songs,
Yeah.
no doubt about it. So
So he had a 5 album stretch. I'm just reading it out so I get the order correct because they kind of blend
mhm.
together. Because they all came out in like within 5 years of each other. But
Oh wow.
he had Take Care, which was an album I loved. I remember because I liked Drake and The Weeknd when I was really young.
Mhm.
Like I was introduced to them at a really young age. So when they put out a song together, "Loving the Crew," what is it called again? Crew Love, Love. That's
True
embarrassing.
Love, yeah.
No, no, Crew Love, Crew Love.
Crew Love, that's right, yeah.
When they released that song together, oh, I just remember listening to it like nonstop. But get back to his albums, he had Take Care, Nothing Was the Same. If you're reading this, it's too late. What a Time to Be Alive, which was a collab album with Future, and Views. Now, some people
Views,
don't
yeah.
like Views. I quite like Views. But regardless, he had like a 5 album stretch that was basically like one of, if not the best rap album to come out that year. Obviously, like the year's Kendrick drop would probably be better, but regardless, it just shows you kind of the body of work he was able to create.
Mhm.
And even though kind of his more recent albums haven't, had the same critical acclaim, I wouldn't say I like his last kind of few albums as much as before.
Mhm.
Um, I still think like the idea of him just being a joke is like completely wrong, you know. And I
He
think
gets
in the
shit on a lot.
future,
He
yeah,
doesn't deserve it.
yeah, and I think in the future people will look back and be like, "Wow, he made a lot of good music," you know.
Mm.
And you look at most artists, how many artists have more than like a 5 album stretch of like top notch albums
Mhm.
for their genre? I
It's
would
because
say not many.
no, not many, because he's consistently just like pumping out like very good, like very good music, and as
Mhm.
people are saying, he's putting Canada on the map for like R&B and hip hop, right? Like he was
That
like
was huge.
that was
Yes.
yeah, him and the weekends even just doing more. Like it's just like
Yeah.
Toronto's getting recognized on like other podcasts I've heard I've seen and just heard just by the wayside people are saying like, oh, the have you heard of the Canadian hip hop scene and stuff,
Yeah.
and so we're getting more and more recognition here,
Mhm.
and I
And
think
there's a ton. Yeah.
oh,
There's
sorry,
a
I said
ton like,
Scorpion was the one I knew, the album,
yeah.
Drake, yeah.
That one came out, I think,
It's
the summer
2018.
before we went to university, I think. I
Mm,
think that's when that one came out. Um, but yeah, and like the Toronto hip hop scene is like really thriving. And we only just brought up Drake just because we wanted to kind of do a deep dive on him because he's maybe the most iconic Canadian artist in terms of who people know.
mhm,
But certainly there's a ton of other really good rappers and artists. And then, like we mentioned, obviously on the more R&B side, you have The Weeknd, who is
mhm,
from Scarborough. I would say maybe my favorite contemporary artist, um, like who I listen to most and who I have listened to for the longest period of time. And I think the thing that's so impressive to me with The Weeknd is a couple things. One, longevity,
mhm,
because he's been doing it now for over a decade, putting out like really good creative albums consistently for over a decade now. And also how he's been able to change his sound.
mhm,
Because if you listen to his first couple albums, like the trilogy and that, it was much more kind of R&B, like kind of classic R&B,
mhm,
um, and a bit experimental. Like he was coming up with unique songs, unique kind of arrangements to go with his music because he produces quite a bit of his own work, which is cool because it's a bit more specific to him, and he's able to really like take what's in his head and put it out into music as opposed to just getting beats from a producer or having someone else kind of come up with the arrangements of his songs.
no, no
And
sampling
then
or not as much.
yeah, well, he definitely does sampling, but he kind of comes up with the ideas on his own, right? Because
Mhm,
that's what hip hop is. A lot of it is sampling, and but still, it's great. I mean, it's just a
mhm,
different kind of sound, obviously. And then you look at kind of in the mid 2010s, he had like My Dear Melancholy, Starboy, two
mhm,
completely different albums with totally different kind of themes. One is like obviously very arrogant and confident, like Starboy, with a lot of songs where he's kind of just, like bragging about his success. And then My Dear Melancholy, which is
mhm.
completely different, like very emotional, kind of depressing. You see different sides of his personality, maybe his brain and his creativity. And then you look forward to his most recent 2 albums where he's gone with like a synth 80s sound for After Hours and Dawn FM, which
Blinding
like
Lights is the
yeah, and that was from
yeah.
After Hours. And he kind of started, I think, kind of the mainstream like 80s revival music wise
Mhm,
with the sound. Because After Hours came out of nowhere. Like I remember that album came out and I don't listen to a ton of 80s music.
mhm.
I was like, what is this? Like it sounds like it's from the 80s. Like it was crazy. It was like listening to an album just like right out of the 80s that you found in your
Yeah.
basement. But it was great because he took the sound, but he also added his own spin to it, like his great vocals and creative songwriting, great
Mhm.
hooks. I thoroughly enjoyed After Hours. I have that as one of my favorite Weekend albums for sure. And
Yeah,
that
like
came out a decade after my other favorites.
this one was, it was interesting. Like I again listened a lot after hours because like at school, like I listened to more of the weekend, and it's just funny you seeing like we were talking before, like how is music plateauing nowadays? And so what I see here is people are looking to the past to get influences. You see this in the weekend, right? So the '80s influence. I see some Bruno Mars with the '70s, like kind of like the funk kind of stuff as well. And
Yeah,
you see a lot of like genre blending with like this pop sound with other things. Like we'll talk about another artist today. Has more of a country mixed in with pop, but it's
mhm,
it's mostly just like mainstream pop with like the old, like a little bit of country twang that they used to that they were really, it was really prevalent in their music in the early 2000s. But we'll get into the that artist. But
for sure. If you didn't know, we're referring to Shania Twain.
there you go, Mitch. There you go. That's it.
Definitely an iconic artist. But yeah, I mean, The Weeknd, one of my favorite like modern artists, maybe my favorite Canadian artist personally.
Mhm.
And I don't think we need to tell people to go check him out. I
No,
think they
no.
know by now.
Go check out the weekend, everybody. Go check him out. He's pretty good.
Yeah, and then I guess we kind of touch on a couple other kind of big pop stars of today, male pop stars at least.
Mhm.
Justin Bieber. I mean, he's got some huge hits. I'm not personally the biggest fan, not my kind of music. But definitely a lot of people like him, and good for him. I mean, just a
Yeah.
kid from Stratford and became one of the biggest pop stars in the world, you know.
Yeah, like the growing up, I know I wasn't a huge fan of his music. Like, he had some pretty good stuff in his like the earlier stuff when I we first came out, and he's closer to our age.
Baby.
So a baby,
Yeah.
one time,
Yeah.
you smile,
Yeah.
I smile, like you smile.
Yeah.
Like so those ones were fun. And I remember I was younger and I was like, oh no, no, like Justin Bieber, he's like um teen heartthrob thing. I'm not a fan of that. And then but my parents were saying like, no, you got to like understand like you might not like his music specifically, but you like respect how he built himself up and like became, he's a boy from Toronto, grew up
Mm.
in the limelight. So
Well, Stratford. Yeah.
Stratford, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Canada.
And then another kind of like male heartthrob pop star that's come out kind of in our generation would be Shawn Mendes.
Mhm.
You've been to a Shawn Mendes concert, fun fact.
I have been to a Shawn Mendes concert. Took my girlfriend at the time there, and oh, it was good. Like I do enjoy his music because that's when I started playing more acoustic stuff. That's like I'm near Sean's age, and it was funny because I remember playing. Let me toot my own horn here. I was playing live music, and someone called me the Blonde Sean. So come with the Blonde Sean, and that
Oh
I walked away
boy.
with a smile after that. I'm like, oh, that was fun, but no, no, not Shawn Mendes.
We'll definitely have to
But
clip that.
oh
We'll
yeah.
definitely have to clip that for the TikTok. But
hmm
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, two kind of heartthrob, not maybe not right in our wheelhouse, but you got to respect the hustle, respect the ability to put out a lot of music and tour and all that. And then now we get into kind of the iconic singers who don't perfectly fit into a genre. The kind of pop, one's kind of pop country, the other pop R&B
I,
classical kind of,
yeah,
so
yeah,
let's
I'd say
just get
that.
right to it. Let's start with Celine Dion,
hmm
one of the great singers of all time, an incredible voice. Obviously, people know her work from partly from the Titanic
I
soundtrack,
I would
some
say if
iconic
no one
songs.
grew up with like knowing her and her music,
Mhm.
Titanic brought you right to her,
Yeah,
100%.
for
Yeah.
sure. And I'll be honest, I haven't listened to a ton of Celine Dion like on my own, but I mean,
Mhm.
anytime I hear her songs on TV or on the radio or something, the thing that obviously just like grabs you is her incredible vocals.
Oh
The
yeah.
range and the power in her voice. She's definitely up there with some of the best singers of all time.
Yeah, and you hear and what's great about her influence too, because people said like maybe Canadian artists don't get as much recognition, is you see people like imitate her and like her voice and stuff too. Like there's one I watched Jimmy Fallon, I think, and
Mm.
Ariana Grande, one of her uh
Like
impersonations was Celine Dion.
karaoke things
Yeah,
they
a
do or
karaoke thing.
something.
It was like Celine Dion. I was like, whoa, like and
Mm.
it was really intense, like how accurate she was with that voice.
Yeah,
It's just a
Ariana Grande,
specific
like
voice too.
she like because she's so popular, and like maybe like kind of the
Mhm.
music she puts up, but like she has an incredible voice,
Oh
great
yeah,
singer, like
unmatched range.
one of
Mhm.
the best singers of this generation without question, like great vocalist.
Mhm.
Um, But yeah, I mean, Celine Dion, what is there to say? Canadian icon
Mhm.
and one of the best singers of all time. That's
Yeah.
probably the only way to put it. And then the other one, the other kind of
Mhm.
icon that we put into its own little category would be Shania Twain.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love a Shania Twain song at the barbecue,
Oh,
or whatever? Just gets you fired up.
yeah.
Got a little couple beers or a couple drinks in you. Get
Yeah.
dancing and
Yeah. It's very upbeat, nice, easygoing music. And what I was saying about this too was I grew up with like my mom loved Shania Twain, so I listened to her around the house, Up and Man, I Feel Like a Woman. Those are the
mhm,
two like iconic songs. But what I did was I checked out like before this for this video, episode. I
mhm.
checked out her newest album, and apparently she had one out in 2023. It
Yeah,
just came
I think she
out,
just put one out.
and what was cool was I didn't see her other albums throughout the years. I remember listening to her older ones,
Mhm.
and but listening to the new one, there's some songs where you hear that like modern, um, like pulsing kick drum kind of sound, like modern sound that's
Okay.
like very like driving the song.
Yeah.
So it's very similar to like a lot of pop music nowadays, but it has that
Mhm.
country twang, like a little
Mhm.
bit that's still her like old sound.
Yeah.
It's cool because I just want to go through her albums to see like how her sound developed over the years because it was like 2004, 3, like her big albums
Oh,
that I know of, and then the
maybe
new
even
one now.
earlier.
So, oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, the 90s too. Like,
I think even the 90s. But yeah, I mean, again, just an icon. I mean, definitely a country pop artist, but she did it because we've ridiculed country pop, certainly on this podcast. We're not
yeah,
fans. I'm not a fan. But I think with her, she was able to kind of transcend just that kind of like cliche
junk food
reproduced
kind of.
sound.
Yeah.
She was able to sort of come up with a way to make it more creative and more her own sound.
Mhm.
Um, and also just like fun songwriting for sure.
Keeping it
Like, man,
fun.
I
Yeah.
feel like a woman, all that. Like just classic stuff. And again, that's somewhat I think people know she's Canadian for sure.
Hmm.
I feel like that's one that she's definitely known. If you ask people who their favorite Canadian artist was, she would come up quite a bit
Hmm.
um, in that discussion. Now with rock, there's
Yeah.
been some good rock artists. I
Hmm.
feel like we don't have like a real heavyweight though. I would say maybe arguably one band would be
Hmm.
considered a rock heavyweight um, from this group. Um, but we certainly don't have a Rolling Stones or a Led Zeppelin
No.
or you know something like
the
that.
the
But
English rock bands will put us to shame.
yeah,
I'll admit. But the
well,
one you're
England
for,
England kicks America's ass anyway when it comes to rock.
yeah,
So,
there you
and
go.
we're 1/10 the size of the U.S.
Mhm.
population wise. So we're still punching above our weight as far as I'm concerned. So
Mhm.
let's touch on a couple more modern sort of bands of our lifetime or artists.
Mhm.
This one is a band that's been, we talked about memes before. There may be no more memed band in the history of human civilization than Nickelback.
Oh yeah.
Um, there was a point where I was like just immersed. It was like Stockholm syndrome where I was just like, yeah, like I hate Nickelback. Blah. And I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of Nickelback, but I certainly no one deserves the amount of ridicule and memes that those guys have gotten for the
Yeah.
last 5 years. No one does. Doesn't
I
matter
think
how good or bad. Like doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. Yeah, like I think they even addressed it, Mitch. Do I think they even addressed kind of the memes and they're like, we don't want
Mhm.
people like hating on us for like no, that was Imagine Dragons. Like
Well,
we
they
don't
like stepped
those two,
away.
yeah.
Like Nickelback, they basically just stepped away for a while. Now they've come back,
Mhm.
and there's been a turn for sure, where people aren't like bullied into saying they hate Nickelback even if they like them,
Yeah.
and people just kind of found someone else to pick on.
And I
Um,
I loved Nickelback too as a kid. I grew up and those were one of the artists that them and Simple Plan, which is we'll talk about them. But
mhm.
yeah, I love Nickelback and Saving Me was one of the ones I, I really enjoyed, one of their
Yeah.
songs.
I mean, in the early 2000s, that was probably like the first band I knew about, living in Canada, and
Hmm.
they were a huge band. Like they had a bunch of charting songs in the US and everything. Like they'd go on world tours. I mean, they were a really big band in their time.
Oh yeah.
Another artist who I would say is pretty popular among people in our generation, maybe a little older than us, but I would say still we're aware of for
Hmm.
sure, is Avril Lavigne,
Yep. Yep.
who a little bit like Simple Plan. She was definitely bigger, I think, but kind of that pop punk sound, wouldn't you say?
Mhm.
Like kind of poppy,
Yeah,
but
it's like
had
the
a punk twist, and a bit of the instrumentals were a bit more punk, you know?
yeah, I'd say that's a good point. I'd say like it's the pop and the punk kind of marrying into this like the sound with a little bit of teen
Mhm.
angst thrown in there,
Yeah.
kind of thing, right?
And I
So
think she made like a lot of just like fun, good songs
mhm.
that especially in that time, you know, for young people, teenagers and that really enjoyed, you know, because you can
Mhm.
relate to it. It wasn't like anything too heavy, you know, where when you're at that age, you may not understand or you may not like. It was just like good,
Yeah,
solid, fun pop punk for kind of young people, you know.
yeah, and
Um, and it still holds up for sure, even now. You know,
mhm.
you hear it on at a bar or at a club or something.
I've
I
heard on
don't
the
know
radio a
what
few
clubs
times
are
like
playing Avril Lavigne, but it's still good.
no, like when I'm not like using and not have my phone connected in the car, I'm listening to radio. That pops up once in a while. More rare now,
Mhm.
but I do hear it. But talking about teen angst, that brings me kind of nice to Simple Plan. I don't know, Mitch, did
Mhm.
you listen to Simple Plan when you were growing up, or
I knew
a
like
little
a
bit?
couple of their songs. I didn't know a ton though, but I knew some other people who did listen to them quite a bit.
That was it was my first introduction to more like um rock. Oh, because I was a kid. I'm gonna embarrassingly admit this, but my friends down the street, we loved Simple Plan so much, and they had instruments we know how to play, so we airplayed and stuff and made videos and when I was like 6, 5 or 6 years old, we made like little videos, put them on YouTube somewhere. I don't know, go deep dive, go find them. But that was my introduction to Simple Plan, and I love them. And songs like you might know, I'm Just a Kid.
Yeah.
I'm just
That
addicted.
well, that became a big thing on like TikTok a little while ago.
Oh, really? Oh,
I'm just
I
a
don't know
kid.
that.
I'm just a
The kid,
kid. I don't
life
wanna
is a nightmare.
go
Yeah,
back. I don't know
great.
the lyrics,
And
but
that's the epitome of teen angst was Simple Plan,
that's
100%.
like that is the perfect band for like a preteen or teenager who doesn't want to be like just listening to pure pop, but also doesn't
Mhm.
want to get into like the real kind of punk or real
Yeah,
heavy stuff like
it was the edge. It
Nirvana
was the
or
cusp.
whatever. It was like pop for people who wanted to be punk, kind of, you know, but didn't
That's
really go all the way in, you know?
that's how I put it. Dip your toe in the punk world. Say that.
Yeah.
And then later after their second album, I remember they sang more about love and heartbreak and stuff. So it became a little um more mainstream that way.
Mhm.
Because it was in about 2008 is when they started doing their more like love songs, like Your Love Is a Lie, like more like those like heartbreaking songs. Also, um, Montreal, they're sorry, French Canadian. So either from Montreal.
Simple Plan?
Simple Plan, yeah. Same with Celine Dion. She's a French Canadian as
Oh,
well.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Mm.
Yep. Shout out the French Canadians.
Mm.
And then another band who we kind of it wasn't really planned, but we ended up kind of bashing in our Beatles Stones episode out of the gate,
Oh yeah.
mainly because of our guest not being a fan. And I'm sure the Canadian, the RCMP or whatever, will be knocking down our door, taking our passports for speaking badly about the Tragically Hip. But that's who we'll talk about next.
Yeah.
They are, I would say, the ultimate Canadian band in terms of they are massive in Canada.
Mhm. Massive.
Um, like if you ask someone who's their favorite Canadian rock band, the Hip might be the most popular answer you would get.
Mhm.
At least people above a certain age, obviously, like maybe above 30 or something
Yeah.
like that. Not that they aren't appreciated by younger people, but just, you know, not every young person listens to older music, obviously.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll be honest, I'm haven't listened to much of the Hip, not the biggest fan.
Mhm.
Um, but one thing that's definitely, you know, like the Hip, I think part of what built that connection between them and Canadians as their fans was just they didn't like try to become kind of a world band. Like they would tour small cities in Canada. They'd write songs about different parts of Canada that definitely weren't used to having songs written about them and their
Mhm.
story, kind of what they know. So I guess from a music aspect, because you are a fan of the Hip, kind of
Mhm.
what about their music resonates with you?
What I liked is honestly Gord Downey's vocals. Vocals was the big one. It was the I won't even it's that the powerful it's the rock and roll voice. That's what it was.
Mhm.
And you hear that with I won't draw the comparison with Zeppelin. I know Zeppelin has their own, like Robert Plant has their huge. I know I not in the same league, but I'm saying that's
What
the
I
kind
would
of
say is,
sound. That's kind of
I
the
think he
sound I like.
sings with emotion.
Emotion. It's the heart and soul. You're right, 100%. And what I love about it is just they have a range too, where a lot of their very popular songs like Bob Cajun and Wheat
Mhm.
Kings are the two like very the slow ballads that sing about Canada. And I love it. We talk about rural Canada a lot. And but the rock songs, great. Like you can put them in with a lot of the rock bands, like American rock bands, and they
Mhm.
would sound similar, like New Orleans is Sinking and She Didn't Know. Those are two really like they're more upbeat like rock
Mhm.
songs, which I really enjoyed. And just to show everybody how like small small the music scene is in Canada. I remember I when Ben and I were in the band, we played in Kingston, which is where they're from, Kingston,
Mhm.
Ontario. And Paul Langlois, the rhythm guitar player, was a judge for the Battle of the Bands, and we got to meet him
Hmm.
after the show. And we were just like
Yeah.
we were loading up our equipment and stuff. And he came over with the smoke and he's talking to us and he's like, "Hey man, you guys had a great set and stuff." And he helped us load our van up. And it was just a
Mhm.
really cool experience. And then also another thing too is um, we just recently moved to Kingston, and I know my mom owns a flower shop there, and so she was sending flowers. The sons of Gord Downey and I think it was Paul Langlois, I'm not sure,
Okay.
were sending flowers to each other's families.
Oh, that's
So looking
cool.
at the dress, we're like, oh, it's cool.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they're definitely like the most Canadian band, and
Hmm.
they just have a really deep connection with Canadian people because of the music, because of kind of the way they treated their fans, by
Hmm.
going to small venues in different parts of the country that don't normally get, big bands.
It's like
They had
personable. Yeah.
they caught on a tiny bit in the US, but not really, and kind of nowhere else.
No.
That's not to say they made bad music. But I think part of maybe why they didn't catch on was because they had kind of songs that were specific to Canada. So on the
Yeah.
one hand, you have Canadians that really like the kind of personal experience that they felt they were portraying in their music.
Hmm.
And then people from other countries may not really have related to or understood. And also, I would say Gord Downie is a bit of an unconventional singer.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so maybe it's a bit of an acquired taste, where you listen to it and then you really like it. Whereas if you kind of just hear one song, you might be, oh, that's a bit strange.
Mm.
But definitely the they personify Canadian rock for sure.
Yeah. And also
Um,
just I heard like live when they play live, they don't move around a lot when they play live. It's just Gord
mm,
Downie. He's the front man, right? So he's going around, he's singing like you said, very unconventional, but he had that like that swag on stage. He was running around.
mm,
But the other people in the band, they just kind of stood still. So my parents said when they
mm,
saw him live, they weren't like a live band. They weren't as good as like let's say the Stones, for example, who were like they're all kind of moving
oh,
around, Mick Jagger
that's
kind
a
of
high
thing.
bar, but I
It's a
see
high
what
bar.
you
Yeah,
mean.
yeah.
Yeah,
They
I
don't
see
they
what you
don't
mean
move
now.
around as much. So
Yeah, it was more about the music than kind of the show, if you will.
exactly.
Um, and then getting to two other, we'll finish up here with the last couple of rock bands, but so one band, one artist, um, who are just kind of like good classic rock, that happen to be Canadian would be Bryan Adams and
Hmm.
Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, which Bachman Turner Overdrive, they had Taking Care of Business, right?
Oh yeah.
I think that's them. Taking care of business every
Every
day.
day. A lot of people
Um,
wouldn't know they're Canadian. That's
yeah, that's the
yeah.
thing. I think both of those artists people may not know would be Canadian,
Mm,
if they weren't Canadian themselves. So
yeah.
definitely worth mentioning. Bryan Adams, Summer of '69. Just that might be the ultimate like dad rock or classic rock song,
Mhm.
that plays in the car,
Yeah.
and you're just listening, you're like, this is
Mhm.
good, like this whatever. Didn't I would say I think Bryan Adams is probably a bit better of an artist, than
Mhm.
Bachman Turner Overdrive. But
I'd say
both bands
maybe
had
more popular, yeah.
success. Yeah, both
Mhm.
bands had success in the US and had good careers for themselves for sure. And then we'll finish with probably the best Canadian rock band, I think a lot of people would say, particularly those outside of Canada. Like we mentioned, the hip, huge in Canada, not so
Mhm.
much anywhere else. And that would be Rush.
I was gonna say we can't forget them. I was about to
Yeah,
mention if you didn't.
yeah. And Rush, is a very unique band. They were a three-piece band.
Yeah.
Who the hell? Who is a three-piece band? Like, so you have the guitarist. Don't remember his name, unfortunately.
Hmm.
You have
Oh,
Neil Peart, the drummer, who's considered one of the best drummers of all time, and then you have Geddy Lee, who is the bassist and
yep.
frontman, who had a unique voice. And how many frontmen, lead singers do you see as a bassist?
Hmm.
Not very often. You could kind of say obviously McCartney, but he
Hmm.
was a dual kind of frontman, obviously with John Lennon. So unique band, and they were very creative. I think Rush is
Hmm.
kind of a band you love or you don't care for them. You know, it's like people love it because they understand the music, they get what they're trying to do, or it's kind of just like, it's a little out there for me,
Yeah.
you know.
And my uncle, he collects vinyl. He loves Rush. So growing up, I was born in the mid 60s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
he grew
I'm
up.
saying as if I
Yeah.
know,
Mhm,
but
yeah. Yeah,
carry
of
on.
course. Yeah.
It was more of a carry on.
Yeah.
So go
So,
ahead.
so he loved Rush growing up, and so he has all these albums. And I started collecting vinyl too, and I have some Rush. I have Exit Stage Left, one of the live albums. Uh, it's very popular. But oh, sorry. Oh, by the way, Alex Lifeson, the guitar player.
Oh, there we go.
Alex, like, come on,
Shout out.
yeah,
Also, I
shout
think
out.
Neil Peart passed away, so
He did pass away.
R.I.P.
R.I.P.
Neil Peart. Too
Was
bad.
it too
But one of the
bad?
great rock and roll drummers of all time, for
Mhm.
sure.
But about their music, like you were saying with they were big outside of Canada. That's the thing. Like they were a Canadian band, like the Hip, but the Hip just struggled to pass that barrier of like just playing Canada. But in the States, like
Worldwide, yeah.
Rush, yeah, worldwide States. Sorry, Rush was on like the world stage, and
Mhm.
I'd say they didn't sing about culturally specific things about Canada, which is what
No.
allowed them to go. But I'd say one of my favorites by them is Limelight and Spirit of the Radio and YYZ. That's how I got introduced to the Rush was the instrumental song YYZ.
Notice the YYZ instead of YYZ, right? Because
Yep, yep.
that's Canadian, obviously. So I'm not too familiar with rock. I know that my dad
Mhm.
loves them, one of his favorite bands. I haven't listened to other music, not because I don't like them, just there's only so many bands and artists
Mhm.
you can listen to. They're just one not as
Yep,
familiar with. Um, but yeah, definitely
yep.
like kind of had a unique sound,
Mhm.
and again a bit unconventional, which is cool. Like they weren't just kind of making cookie cutter
Mhm.
rock songs, trying to just copy
Yep.
off everyone else and just come up with your own spin. They were
Mhm.
able to sort of, create an album that was just theirs and people liked it. They liked it. If
Mhm.
they didn't, that's okay.
And,
I don't think they were trying to become a huge, like, commercial band by any
mhm.
means.
But they were very creative. And like you're saying,
Mhm.
unconventional. I don't know if this is a little trivia I learned when I
Mhm.
learned about Rush was so YYZ was the first song I learned about. And like I was saying earlier, was Guitar Hero is what got me into a lot of classic rock. And YYZ was one of them. Full instrumental song and the intro. So YYZ is the area code for the Pearson
It's
airport.
like the airport code, whatever that
Airport
is,
code, right?
like LAX. Or is that even? I don't even know.
LAX, yeah. No, sorry,
Redact, redact.
LAX, yeah.
I know that's
No,
what it's called. I don't know if that's actually what the airport code is, or if
I
that's the name of the airport.
I think you're right. I think it's LAX, but we have YYZ, and the song YYZ, the intro, very unconventional intro, is the Morse code for YYZ.
Hmm.
It goes like dun 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 dun. It's a very weird timing. And when I grew up, I was always like listening to it, and I was like, this is a very weird intro. But it's the Morse code for
Mhm.
YYZ, which I think that just ties into the very unconventional creative sound, right? So
Yeah, that's very cool.
I say check
That
it
was
out.
a yeah, that was a good place to end. Do you have any other people you wanted to touch on that deserved a shout out, or you think we
Uh,
covered most of them? Obviously, there's some people we didn't cover.
of course,
Doesn't
yeah,
mean we were ignoring them. There was only so many
yeah,
we could have in an episode,
yeah. I just one fact about Simple Plan. I remember
Mhm.
them was what people might know them is they were the stepping outside of Canada. They did the "What's New Scooby Doo" intro song.
Mm.
That was Simple Plan, and like that was just cool to see them like breaking out of Canada that way. So
Yeah,
and
breaking barriers.
breaking barriers. There you go.
No, that's great. It was good to shine a little light on all the great artists and bands, from
Mhm.
Canada. Obviously, majority of the English speaking music we listen to comes from the US and the UK, but a lot of good artists here in Canada. So we'll leave it there. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back next week. Save it for the podcast.
Save
That's
it.
perfect. What you're
I'll save
talking
that. I'll
about.
save
That is
that.
absolutely perfect.